Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are decoding the hidden economics behind what we earn. We're going to pull back the curtain on exactly how human value is calculated in the labor market. So whether you're, analyzing your own paycheck or looking at massive global workforce trends, it all really just comes down to a few fascinating core principles. To get us started, I want you to imagine a traditional coal or iron ore mine. You're probably picturing workers in hard hats driving massive, heavy machinery, right? Well, today, mining giants like Rio Tinto are increasingly replacing those drivers with fully robotic, autonomous vehicles. And why is that? It's not just some cool sci-fi experiment. It is a real-world labor mystery driven by the exact economic forces we're going to unpack for you today. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap. First, robots and derived demand. Then, the demand for labor, followed by the supply of labor. Fourth is labor market equilibrium, and finally, explaining differences in wages. Let's get into it.
Part 1. Robots and derived demand. So, any product you buy requires a mix of labor, capital, and resources. But here is the secret to all hiring. A company doesn't just want workers for the sake of having workers, right? Their demand for labor is entirely what we call a derived demand. That means a firm's need to hire you is 100% derived from how much the public demands the final product you're helping to make. Literally, if nobody wants to buy iron ore, Rio Tinto's demand for both truck drivers and robots drops straight to zero. It's all connected.
Part 2. The demand for labor. So how exactly does a company decide how many people to actually hire? Well, economists use this term called the marginal revenue product of labor, or MRPL. Now, don't let the academic jargon intimidate you. Unpacking this simply means asking one highly practical question. How much extra cash does this specific new hire bring into the business? It's really that simple. The MRPL curve literally becomes the firm's demand curve for labor.
And this brings us right to the law of diminishing returns. Assuming a firm has a fixed amount of equipment, like a set number of computers or trucks, as they hire more and more workers, the extra output per worker eventually drops. Take a look here. The first worker might bring in $1,200 of revenue, which gives us $600 of additional profit. Awesome, right? But by the time they hire the fifth worker, the extra revenue drops to just $400. Because the wage is fixed at $600, hiring that fifth person actually costs the company $200 in lost profit. No way they're doing that.
So the absolutely crucial point here is this rule of profit maximization. A firm is going to keep hiring workers as long as the marginal revenue product is greater than the wage. They'll stop hiring or even fire workers if the MRP falls below that wage. The absolute sweet spot, the optimal number of workers to maximize profit, is the exact moment the marginal revenue product perfectly equals the wage. Hit that point and you are golden.
Now, that demand curve isn't static. It can shift left or right based on outside forces. Say workers gain new skills, what we call an increase in human capital. Well, they become more productive and demand for them shifts right. Changes in technology, like introducing those autonomous mining robots we talked about, also fundamentally shift how many human workers a firm demands at any given wage.
Part 3. The supply of labor.
All right, now we have to flip the script. How do you, the worker, decide how much labor to supply? For most of us, higher wages mean we're totally willing to work more hours. But what's really fascinating here is that at incredibly high wage levels, the supply curve actually bends backward. It's crazy, but it happens because of the income effect. When someone is incredibly well paid, they might decide they earn enough to comfortably survive, and they start valuing their free time over making even more money. They actually supply less labor as their wages reach the stratosphere.
And just like demand, the overall supply of workers in a market can shift too. A growing population or changing demographics will push the labor supply curve to the right. Even things like the expansion of other specific industries or the availability of unemployment benefits can completely change how many people are actively offering their labor in a specific market.
Part 4. Labor market equilibrium.
Okay, let's bring both halves of our model together. Check out these two very different scenarios. On one hand, if labor productivity jumps up, firms want more workers. The demand curve shifts right, pushing the equilibrium wage up, and more people are employed. Beautiful. But what happens if the population suddenly surges? Well, the supply curve shifts right. With an abundance of available workers and no change in demand, that equilibrium wage gets pushed down, even though total employment rises. So as you can see, it is quite a delicate balancing act.
Part 5. Explaining differences in wages.
Now we get to apply our equilibrium model to solve a massive real-world anomaly. It's something you might have wondered yourself. Why do top professional cricketers earn millions of dollars, while university lecturers, who arguably perform a vital societal function, earn just a fraction of that? Is the market just broken?
The economic reality here is stark, and it all comes back to our golden rule. Wages equal the marginal revenue product of labor. A university lecturer might teach a few hundred students a year, right? Their output has a physical limit. But a top cricketer's output, their performance, is broadcast and sold to millions of fans around the entire world, bringing in massive advertising and ticket revenue. Because the cricketer's marginal revenue product is astronomically higher, their demand curve intersects with supply at a massively higher equilibrium wage. It's not really about moral value, it's just about the sheer revenue generated per worker.
Now, aside from raw revenue, there are two final factors that really skew wages in the real world. First up is compensating differentials. This basically just means you generally get paid higher wages to compensate for doing dangerous or deeply unpleasant jobs. Makes sense, right? The second is the ugly reality of economic discrimination, which is paying someone less or excluding them entirely based on totally irrelevant characteristics like race or gender, rather than their actual productivity or experience.
But here is a truly fascinating economic insight. The free market actually penalizes businesses that discriminate. Think about it. If a firm refuses to hire from a certain group based on prejudice, they are artificially reducing their own labor supply. This forces them to pay higher wages to the limited pool of workers they will actually hire, which drives up their operating costs and forces them to raise prices. Meanwhile, an inclusive, non-discriminating competitor has access to the entire labor supply, keeps their costs lower, drops their prices, and simply takes the market share.
And that leaves us with one incredibly powerful, lingering question. If economic models clearly show that discrimination actively costs companies money and makes them less competitive, why hasn't pure market competition completely eliminated it in the real world? Well, it turns out while supply, demand, and marginal revenue perfectly explain the math of the labor market, human behavior still introduces variables that no equation can completely solve. Thanks for joining this explainer, and keep questioning the economics all around you.